Spoiler alert! I will talk about some of these films in detail. If you want to avoid possible spoilers, I recommend you skip some parts. In the past few years, I rewatched the majority of the animated Disney movies, some of them multiple times, and I was stunned at how well they held up. Many of these animated Disney movies are still very popular, like The Lion King, Aladdin, or Beauty and the Beast. But there are a couple of entertaining Disney movies that seem to remain under the radar. They're rarely mentioned in other media, don't show up in the majority of top lists, or they receive mediocre reviews. Personally, I think these movies deserve more credit than they got. So now it's time to give them the appreciation they deserve. Keep in mind, this list is entirely opinion-based. If you think other movies deserve to be on this list, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let's not waste any more time and start the list. Number 5. The Black Cauldron. The biggest problem the Black Cauldron has is that it was such a financial failure it almost destroyed Disney. This gave the Black Cauldron a bad rap. Even when people ignored this reputation and judged the movie on its own right, the reactions weren't particularly positive. But in all honesty, I've always enjoyed this film. Even as a kid I enjoyed it, and I wasn't bothered by the dark imagery. The Black Cauldron is just a fun road trip through a fantasy land. On the way, you meet all kinds of strange characters, either friend or foe, which gave me a nice, adventurous feeling. The villain is very dark. His demonic skeleton look, red eyes, and his dark voice. This is one intimidating villain. Not particularly engaging in terms of story, but his menacing appearance definitely makes him an entertaining character to watch. No masterpiece by any means, but a fun movie that doesn't deserve the bad reputation it got. Number 4. Treasure Planet. This is one of those movies that I didn't like as a kid, but I think is fairly good now. I remember distinctly, every time I would watch the trailer, I would be filled with excitement. It looked like you were about to see the most awesome movie of all time.
It's Treasure Planet.
But man, was I disappointed with the actual thing? The movie was actually much more story-driven and much less action-packed than I thought, thus it disappointed me. Nowadays, the story is actually what draws me in so much. Pirates in space is cool and all, but it's the well-developed characters and how they grow within the story that make Treasure Planet a good movie. The story is not so much about going on an adventure to find treasure, but more about the main character, Jim, finding a place to belong. When he was a kid, his father just straight up walked out on him and his mother. This pain still haunts Jim when he's at an older age. When he goes on a quest for pirate treasure, he starts to bond with this pirate John Silver, who starts to become some kind of father he never had. It's seeing the bond between these two develop over time, and how their conflicting goals put this bond to the test on numerous occasions, what makes it an engaging story. The action, looking at it now, is actually very solid when it's there. The character designs are great, and the pop songs fit surprisingly well. There are two problems I have with this movie. One is that it overuses CGI. I don't mind seeing CGI added from time to time, but this movie uses it frickin' everywhere. The contrast is so distracting, and the visual appeal of the movie suffers a great deal from it. This is also one of those Disney movies where the comedy is really hit and miss, but when it misses, it just hurts. Especially the robot called Ben, who appears in the last act of the film, is really annoying. He almost ruins the entire third act of the film if it weren't for the epic finale. But aside from that, I still think the things Treasure Planet does good makes it an impressive, worthwhile movie that draws me in from time to time. Number 3. The Fox and the Hound. The Fox and the Hound has a nice, smaller story. No kingdoms, no giant evil that wants power, but instead it's a more personal story about two pets who are friends. What I love about the plot is that it's not about the friendship itself, but the consequences of the friendship. They are naive kids who don't know that one day the dog will be forced to hunt down the fox. It's seeing how these characters slowly grow old and have to accept their fates, and how their friendship can't go on, that makes it a strong story. Despite their separation, a part of their childhood friendship always sticks with them, even when their bond is long gone. This creates a powerful finale where both their old bonds as well as their current rivalry is put to the ultimate test. I admit, I always shed a tear watching this movie. Many people did, or still do, in fact, which only shows how strong the plot really is. Still, I can't ignore there are some things I don't like about this movie. The songs are forgettable and are used in scenes I think would have worked better without words. There's also the entire side plot about two birds trying to capture a caterpillar, which is a harmless subplot, I guess, but it has absolutely nothing to do with the main story. It feels like it's there just to offer some comic relief for the small children, and I personally wish they removed this subplot. But despite that, The Fox and the Hound is still a strong movie and definitely one of the most underrated Disney movies ever. Number 2. Oliver and Company. As a kid, I loved this movie, and to my surprise, I think it's still a solid and charming film. It's one of the few Disney classics where I genuinely found myself interested in the story. This comes mostly due to its characters. They're lively, likable characters that give me the impression they have a long, lasting bond between them. I loved just being with these characters, seeing them interact with each other or seeing how they resolve the problems they find themselves in. Oliver and Company is a story where the main characters are in a bad situation, but they manage to make the most out of what little they have. I want these characters to end up well off, and I felt bad for them when things didn't go their way. The songs are, for the most part, really darn good as well. Its opening song, Once Upon a Time in New York City, I still think is one of the best opening songs Disney has ever used. While there are many people who don't remember this movie well, everyone remembers this catchy as hell song.
Why should I worry? Why should I care? I may not have a dime, but I got streets out my way.
In all honesty, I also love the villain more than most other ones Disney came up with. Yeah, hear me out. Sure, as a standalone character, Sykes is not particularly memorable. He is not someone who will be quoted, get fan arts, or cosplays. But the thing that separates Sykes from many other Disney villains is how he is written in the story. If it wasn't for Sykes, Oliver would have been the only main character who wasn't dead at the start of the movie. Fagin is a bum with no money. He could choose between either letting himself and his dog die of starvation or delaying his death by borrowing money from the mob, praying for a miracle he will find a way to return the money. All the troubles our heroes end up in are set in motion by Fagin, making some of the terrible things that happen all the more tragic.
Hey, wait! What are you doing? No, wait! You can't do that!
Keep your mouth shut. Consider our account closed.
Stop! Time out!
But then again, it's either that or death. This makes Sykes' role feel so much more natural rather than the 20th goofy villain who is out for power. But even then, Sykes is pretty intimidating in the moments he's there. He's always lurking in the shadows, looking at you menacingly, and how snapping his fingers could have terrible consequences. Long story short, I really like this movie. I like the villain, the songs, the characters, its plot, everything. I've always found this a good, solid Disney movie that earned more credit than it got. And the most underrated Disney movie is a Goofy movie. One of the Disney movies I rewatched the most, which feels weird to say. I mean, I wouldn't say it has the best plot, it's not the most hilarious Disney movie, nor does it have the best songs. Yet there is something about the way all these elements blend together that make it such an entertaining movie. I think a large part has to do with the focus of the movie. To me, a Goofy movie feels like some sort of funny representation of aspects from my own childhood. This is one of the few, if not the only 2D Disney movies that make me say, I recognize this, or I remember when something similar happened to me. The story is about Max, who is at the age where he's starting to grow up. wanting to distance himself from his parent and stand on his own 2 feet. The way he reacts to Goofy's actions feels similar to how I behaved at the time.
This is the stupidest vacation. You drive me from home, you jam me in this dumb car, then drive 1,000,000 miles away to see some stupid rat show. Call me when the trip's over.
But now that I'm older, I also have a much better understanding of Goofy's actions as well. He sees his son distancing himself from him. Being afraid his son might head down a dark path, Goofy forces his son to hang out with him as an attempt to keep their bond alive. Goofy does all this for the well-being of his son, of course, but he is too oblivious to the fact that his son is starting to grow up and is losing interest in the things he liked when he was little. This movie could have easily picked a side by saying Max is the wrongdoer for not wanting to hang out with his dad, or the father is the wrongdoer for forcing contact, but it merely shows you both sides of the story.
I've grown up. I've got my own life now. I know that. I just wanted to be part of it. You're my son, Max. No matter how big you get, you'll always be my son.
While I enjoy all the silly scenarios they end up in, the more serious moments work surprisingly well, actually. Next to the father-son bond, a big part of the movie centers around the character Roxanne, a girl Max has a crush on. If you look critically at her personality, she is just a typical nice girl without real complexity to her. But what does make her a memorable character, to me at least, is what she means to Max. Anyone who ever had a crush when they were little can recognize something in Roxanne, whether it's her personality or the way Max reacts to her. It's a fun representation of puppy love, literal puppy love in this case. Even if you don't care about that at all, you can still enjoy this movie as a colorful road trip with plenty of silly moments, some catchy songs, and nice animation. The only downside I can think of is that the movie just reeks of the 90s. You can consider this a plus if you're into all that, but personally I don't really care for the cool sunglasses or backwards hats and other 90s tropes. Following trends must come naturally. Here it feels like they try to imitate something they saw kids doing from a distance without a good understanding of why kids liked it. But aside from that, this is a nice time capsule movie I keep returning to, and I can consider it one of my personal favorite Disney movies. Not necessarily one of the best from a critical point of view, but one that brings me the most joy to watch. A Goofy movie, the most underrated Disney classic. So, what do you think are underrated Disney movies? Or underrated animated childhood movies in general? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching!